Okay, there it is. As soon as we're done here, I am going to go into the clerk's office and vote. I've got my ID. As next week's election approaches, there is a pitched battle going on in this state between those who've done everything they could in the last several years to suppress the vote, and those of us who are doing everything we can to make voting more accessible and easier for the people of the city of Madison. We've already done a number of events and a press conference on voter ID. We continue to be as informative as we can. Now, with less than a week until the next election, I'd like to look backward for a moment. Throughout Wisconsin, in the last presidential election, in virtually every community in the state, the vote dropped from the previous presidential election in 2012. There was an exception. Madison, Wisconsin, 2016. We saw a robust turnout, and we want to continue that tradition and ensure that every Madisonian eligible to vote takes that opportunity. It doesn't matter who they're voting for, whether it's one or two candidates on the ballot or they want to express themselves with a write-in, but it's so important as the foundation of our democracy that we turn out to the polls and vote for those candidates who will have an impact on our community's future in the coming year. Well, there's one office here in the city clerk's office, that is most responsible for the administration of the elections. They're the ones who have had to deal with the repressive constrictions on voting rights, the use of the IDs. They've had to deal with limitations imposed upon how much service we as a city government can provide to voters of our community. And so I thought this would be a good time to not only encourage people and remind them that we've got an election coming up next week, that there's still the opportunity for early voting, but to review many of the activities which we've shared with you in the release involving the mail process that's used for absentee voting, the recruitment and education of poll workers, the insurance that the supplies and the ballots are available, and all that work that the clerk and their staff goes through to make sure we get to vote. And so I think everybody knows Maribeth, and this is an opportunity for her to share some of the data with us about turnout, about the records in regards to early voting, and to answer your questions about the extraordinary work that her staff and the poll workers do. Maribeth?
Thank you. We are on track to set another record for turnout this election. In February, we set a record for turnout and the number of voters for a non-presidential February primary. And looking at our absentee numbers right now, even though we're not done with absentee voting yet, we are on track to set a record for a non-presidential April election. And it used to be that when we'd look at turnout and try to project turnout, we would be looking at what's on the ballot, what type of election is this, but that's no longer the case in Madison. People in Madison are voting just because there's an election, and so we are looking at the possibility of setting a record for a non-presidential April election. The previous record was in April of 2011, the mayoral election had 54% turnout, And we have ordered enough ballots for this election to have 75% turnout. Any questions?
Do you have a number on how many absentee ballots have been submitted so far?
Yes. As of 1:30 this afternoon, we had issued 7,035 absentee ballots, and 5,426 of those had been returned to be counted. If anybody still has an absentee ballot at home, we hope they put it in the mail right away, because our mail is sorted in Milwaukee now, so it takes more than a couple of days to get your ballot back to the clerk's office, and we need it by Election Day in order to count it. As of 1:30 today, we have had 3,506 people vote absentee in person in the clerk's office, the libraries, Streets East, and on our 2 campuses in Madison. And we have not had long lines. The longest lines I've heard of were 6 people long at the library yesterday. And so if you compare that to several years ago when we were limited to having voting just in this building, you can see a large difference there.
And how do you have numbers on how this election compares to last February or last spring's?
Yes, last spring's election, we had set a new record for absentee voting, and that was an aldermanic election, which usually has a higher turnout than this sort of election with county supervisor on the ballot or school board on the ballot. And last year, we had issued a total of 8,977 absentees. 5,316 of those, or 5,312 of those were issued in person, and we are on track to break those records.
Let me just try and frame it. Spring elections vary. Some spring elections, we have a mayoral race. Other spring elections, we have a presidential primary. And this is one of those spring elections where we have neither. So traditionally, this is the lowest type of spring election turnout we would anticipate. And so now we're beginning to see numbers that rival some of those elections, like when it's just the city council and no mayoral or no presidential primary.
Mr. Mayor, do you think that this high expectancy for this turnout has anything to do with the national attention the Supreme Court race has gotten?
That may be. It may be that the national attention on the Supreme Court race has fueled interest, or maybe it's just a mood here in Wisconsin where people are finding themselves motivated to come out and vote because political activity has been such a large part of our daily news on such a continuous basis for the last several years. In either case, it's great, it's healthy, and it's good for democracy.
If somebody doesn't have an ID currently, is there still time to get it?
Yes, you can vote at the polls on Election Day even without an ID. You just want to get a copy of your ID to the clerk's office by 4 p.m. the Friday after the election. So you could go to the polls, vote provisionally, and then the following day go to the DMV to get an ID. And your vote would be counted at the Board of Canvassers. Something else to keep in mind about the ID is that when you're proving your identity at the polls, the address on your ID does not matter. So even if you have not updated your address with the DMV, don't let that keep you from voting.
And what if you don't have access to either a passport or a birth certificate?
Even if you don't have any of the documents that the DMV requires, you could apply for the ID petition process. You just need to know your social security number and have proof that you live in Wisconsin. And you could go to the DMV even the day after the election, and the DMV would have to get you an ID within 24 hours.
So we've been seeing a lot of teenagers taking the stage with political movements. Do you think this is going to drive a higher younger voter turnout? I mean, obviously the teenagers can't vote, but
I don't have any data on that, but my guess is that this may be outside of a presidential election and the year, I can't remember which it was, when the voting age was lowered from 21 to 18. This may be the highest initial year of first-time voting by 18-year-olds. And that is certainly welcome, because the earlier somebody starts voting, the more likely they are to be a continuous lifetime voter.
Is Friday the last day for early voting?
No, Friday's the last day for registering at an absentee site and voting absentee. But then Saturday, we still are open for absentee voting. And as far as the 18-year-olds go, just anecdotally, we've had a lot of 18-year-olds registered to vote this week in the city clerk's office.
So the law says you can't register voters on Saturday, but you can accept absentee ballots?
That's right, and it's because of Judge Peterson's ruling that we're allowed to have absentee voting on Saturday. We would be allowed to on Sunday as well. The libraries are closed on Sunday, and we weren't sure that we'd really get many people to show up to vote absentee this Sunday. So Saturday would be the last day for voting absentee for this election.
And how late are we open today and tomorrow?
Today and tomorrow, the clerk's office is open until 4:30 because we found that the libraries are more exciting places for people to vote at night. When we had been open as a clerk's office for voting at night, people chose to go to the libraries instead. The libraries are open for absentee voting up until half an hour before they close for the day.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask you a question? Does anyone have any more questions related to election and voting? I got one in particular. There's a pretty heated court battle going on right now with the governor. Just wanted to see, obviously you're following this as it comes to special elections. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I would support any decision that opens up the ballot box and gives people an opportunity to vote. And probably the court case you're referring to about these two legislative districts where people may go for the rest of the year basically without representation, I think that may be heightening the turnout throughout the rest of the state, certainly here in Madison, as people realize how important it is that they vote and that voting not be suppressed. So whether it's refusing to call elections, whether it is onerous requirements in terms of ID, whether it's limiting voting hours and accessibility to polling places, all of those are abhorrent. They are contradictory to the nature of our democracy. And again, it doesn't matter who you're voting for as long as you're out there voting and exercising that cherished right. And I might put it in this context as well. We hear a lot of support for veterans and those who have fought for our democracy. And there's a lot of people who speak of the sacrifices our veterans have made. If you really want to honor our veterans, you will vote. All right? Thank you so much for being here and helping us get this message out, and especially recognizing the work that the city clerk's office and their staff do. That's really critical. Thank you.